Hello everyone, welcome to the lecture 42 of week 9. You are attending the course Introduction to Language and Linguistics and this is Dripta. Today's lecture will be talking about something called language maintenance and language shift. So, we will start talking about the ideas related to migration and language, then we will give you this idea of language shift and language maintenance, and finally, we will be talking about something called language loyalty. So, we have been talking about the choice of codes and now you have some idea of the choice of codes, specifically the restrictions. So, you have also done some exercise that I asked you to do, not for the purpose of exam, but for your own learning. And now we are saying that there are different social reasons for selecting a particular code in a multilingual community. This is something that you already know because we discussed it previously, but let us pay attention to the second bullet point. What about the people or communities who speak lesser known languages? So, if you think about any community, any speech community, so speech community is basically a term that I am using, any community who speak a common language. If you think about any community who speak a language which is not major, so what happens to them? What about their choice of codes? Do economic and political factors determine language choice? So, if you think about a market, a real marketplace, so how do people talk there in a place where there is some sort of economic transaction going on? And also political factors related to language and power are there important. So, we are asking whether economic and political factors determine language choice. So, we will be talking about different dynamics in a community. It is not very linear, it is not very simple, right. All the societies are complex and we are talking about the language use of the societies which are complex too. So, again I am using the term speech communities. So, some of you are familiar with the Bloomfieldian term, that term that Leonard Bloomfield had used in his work. So, when several speech communities live in close proximity, they influence each other. So, if you have say 2 or 3 different speech communities who are living in a same area in close proximity, they will definitely influence each other if they are not isolated, if they are living together. But how do they influence? They influence each other, they expand, contact or die. So, this is very important for us. We will be talking about these ideas in more detail later, but it is important for us to understand that we are talking about different possibilities. We are saying that the influence can expand, where everyone is using similar kind of variety. As a result of contact, there can be exchanges between languages, or one language can die. The speakers of that language can stop using that particular variety. So, it is also possible that one language influences the lexicon, phonology and morphosyntax. So, if you have languages in a close proximity, they will influence each other in terms of different structural levels. There can be lexical exchanges and phonological and morphosyntactic changes as well. So, all these are important to understand language change. So, language change is a very important domain in not only sociolinguistics, but also historical linguistics, or you can say the overlapping zone. So, we do need to understand language change because it will give us lot of ideas about the nature of language. So, if you think about an intergroup dynamics, it is important to understand the shifting patterns of language choice. So, this is something that we have to understand. So, how individuals and communities react when they talk to the members of other communities? You can of course think about the choice of codes. Do they use their own set of codes, or they use the set of codes that the other community actually uses. So, that is another question, but what about the reaction? This is important. And here are some major factors that affect the situation. So, what are the factors? You can consider the size of the community. If you are talking about community A and B which are in close proximity, and community A has a huge number of speakers and the other community has very less number of speakers, then there will be some differences, right. And the power relationship, factors related to prestige, which of the speech communities have some kind of social prestige, and vitality. So, vitality is related to language endangerment. Some of you already know about it, some of you will learn about it. So, vitality is another factor which will also affect the situation. So, together we can say that a combination of all these factors will be basically important for our purpose, and speakers adjust their language choice patterns. So, it is not that one speaker is using the same kind of pattern in terms of language choice everywhere, but there will be differences. So, you can say that it varies from one generation to another generation. We are saying age is an important factor of change here, and also varies according to other social factors like gender, social class, etc. So, here we are talking about something called mass migration. What do we mean by mass migration? So, when we talking about a size, power, prestige, etc. of a community, let us think about the idea of migration in terms of language. So, again we will give an example from Indian context. So, the partition of India was a major incident in Indian history which displaced a number of people in a huge number of people in Bengal and Punjab region. So, migration of several indigenous communities also in Indian context for the states like Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, who basically migrated to Assam and northern part of Bengal for livelihood. So, these are basically examples of mass migration in Indian context. So, the question is, does the language choice differ? So, when a group of people, a huge community or a community which has a fairly good amount of speakers, so they stay at their homeland, and when they migrate, so do you think that their choice of codes or the pattern of codes will differ? So, I am emphasizing this because we are doing a very exciting study from IIT Kharagpur, which we started in 2020, and it is an ongoing study. So, we are trying to understand whether this migration from Jharkhand to northern Bengal resulted in something called language shift. So, this is interesting and we will talk more about it later. So, now we can go back to this idea that we discussed in the last class, that the pattern of code mixing can be analyzed, and that is something that we are doing. We are trying to analyze the patterns of these mixed data. So, when people carry some language from homeland to other part of a world where they coexist with other languages, they have very interesting examples for us. So, here are some examples like Dutch in Suriname, English in New Zealand, French in Madagascar, Spanish in Cuba, Chinese in Singapore, Turkish in Cyprus, Hindi Bhojpuri in Mauritius. So, you can see there are different social factors for the existence of these languages in a different part of world or a mass migration. So, it can be due to colonialism, it can be something as a result of livelihood, and mostly colonialism in the examples. And I am sure that you have some more examples in your mind that I have not listed. So, I am asking you to note it down for yourself. Now, let us try to define something called language shift and language maintenance, which are two very important terms in sociolinguistics. So, we are using the definition by Weinreich, which he gave in 1953. So, gradual replacement of one language by another. This is a very simple and very important definition. So, you gradually replace one language with another one. It does not happen in one day, but there is a replacement. So, this is something which is known as language shift. So, one community actually shifts their own language and they start using a different language. So, it is often an outcome of language contact in an immigration situation. So, what do we mean by immigration situation? The examples that we have seen earlier. And language maintenance refers to a situation where a speech community, instead of shifting their language, holds on to its language. So, if there are external factors or societal pressure which is compelling a language to shift their language, we also get examples where the society does not, or the speech community does not change the language. They try to maintain their language instead. So, if you think about transmission of Korean to the next generation, so it is common in South Korea and also in Japan. So, in Japan you can say that it is a case of language maintenance, because maybe this is taken from Maher and Kawanishi's work. So, if you can basically think about Japan, you can say that they can shift to Japanese, but they are trying to maintain Korean. So, one very important figure in the discussion of language shift is Joshua Fishman. So, I have I will read out one quote by Joshua Fishman for you. The study of language maintenance and language shift is concerned with the relationship between change and stability in habitual language use on one hand, and ongoing psychological, social and cultural processes on the other, when populations differing in language are in contact with each other. So, this is this is quite long. So, I will ask you to break it in different components and go through it carefully. So, you are talking about you talk about the idea of change and stability in terms of language use, and how there are different processes which are like psychological, social and cultural. So, if you break them, so why we are talking about psychological? So, because there can be a psychological pressure to shift to a different language. Social, of course, because there are social factors, and cultural processes, because one community's culture, rather the community who is the majority community, they can offer their own culture to the minority community, and when they are in contact with each other, something else can happen. They can stop using, the minority community can stop using their language and shift. So, this is very important for us to understand. And along with the definition of language maintenance and language shift, it is important for us to learn about something called language loyalty. So, what do we mean by language loyalty? Inter-community relations between host and migrant community adds another dimension of variation. So, how is the inter-community relation? So, you are talking about the host community who is basically staying at their own place, and migrant community who migrates to the new place. So, how is the relationship between them? So, this is related to the notion of loyalty that Fishman introduced in 1972. So, the notion of language loyalty is basically a variable function of language for group maintenance. Whether the entire group is willing to maintain their language, whether they are loyal to their own language, it is important for us to understand in order to trace whether the community is maintaining the language or shifting the language. So, if we talk about immigrant situations, we say that the language loyalties of immigrant and host communities meet. So, host communities have associations of language loyalty, and the immigrant community will also have certain ideas associated with loyalty. And linguistic minorities are under pressure to adapt more. So, why are we saying that? So, linguistic minorities will definitely, when we are using the term minority, you can understand that they are either less in number, or their status is lower status than the maybe host community. And what kind of pressures are there? Because there are different kind of ideas associated with the pressure, maybe the idea of stereotypes. So, often the linguistic minorities are viewed in terms of certain stereotypes which are there in the society, and that is why they will be pressurized to adapt more or to shift to a different language at times. And members of different immigrant communities behave differently in different situations. This is very important for us to understand. It is not that a group who is migrating to country A will actually exhibit identical pattern if they migrate to a country B, because there are different situations and different social factors which are associated with their language use. So, now we are asking the language attitude question again, because it is very important for us to understand the language attitudes. It is an important term in social linguistics that we often use. How is the language attitudes of the immigrant and the host communities? So, if for example, the host communities have a negative attitude towards the immigrant community, for example, if they speak a minority language, so their the negative attitude will result in language shift. But if there is a positive attitude of the host community which is there, so the immigrant community will try to maintain their language. So, attitude is often associated with these ideas of language maintenance and shift that we need to remember. And these are related to the ethno-linguistic vitality. What do we mean by ethno-linguistic vitality? The ethnic and linguistic identity of a community will be related to the vitality questions which are associated directly to the language death questions. So, whether a language is surviving in a society or dying or they are shifting. So, all these dimensions are included in the vitality component. So, now I am asking you to think about something. So, can you name a migrant majority who maintain their language? So, I am deliberately using migrant majority because the next bullet point is asking a different question. Can you name a migrant minority who shifted their language? So, you can have more examples where migrant minority maintain their language, but it is important for you to note down your own examples which you can use later for understanding of a different concept in sociolinguistics. So, if you think about a migrant majority who maintained their language and minority who shifted their language is the first step, then I am asking you to think about certain demographic factors which are important for language maintenance and shift. What are the demographic factors? Related to the population. So, what are the population centric factors which are basically affecting the language maintenance and shift? For example, if you think that in one community there are a number of older people are there. So, the demography of the community shows that there are more old people than another community. So, there is a chance that because there are more older people, they will try to maintain their language to some extent. So, this is a hypothetical situation, of course. And I am also asking you to comment on the language attitudes of the speech communities around you. This is super important because at times we do not pay attention to the attitudes. Maybe we think about the pattern, maybe we think about the factors related to shift, but we do not pay attention to the fact that there can be negative attitudes which are actually resulting in the shift or death for different communities. So, please try to think about the language attitudes, and also it will be great if you can evaluate your own attitude at times after learning about language maintenance, shift, loyalties and language attitudes. You can clarify or rectify that there are certain attitudes that you need to change around the minority communities around you who speak a different language. So, now the question is, how do we analyze language maintenance and shift in sociolinguistics, or you can say in an overlapping study where sociolinguistics is one component. So, there is no clear methodology, it depends on the contextual factors. So, you can have different factors combined in different social contexts. So, we need to understand the entire social context before we conduct any study in sociolinguistics, and we need to understand the social factors which are very much operative. We do think about the economic conditions, demographic and social and attitudinal factors which may result in changes in terms of maintenance and shift. I'll also ask you to pay attention to the role of the institutions. For example, if you have a school which is promoting the minority language or adding the minority language as a part of the curriculum, then there is lesser chance for language shift for the community's children. But if a school or a community school which not actually include the language of the minority communities, rather they impose the language of the majority communities, then the minority community will basically stop using the language and shift to a different language. So, that is how we are saying that institutions can cause major changes in the pattern. So, you may agree or disagree. So, there is a task for you, again for yourself, not for the purpose of exam. So, I am asking you to identify two bilingual persons and take an account of their language use. So, any person you can select around you and note down all the details like their age, gender and any other information that you think are relevant for you. Now, I am asking you to comment on the fact whether they use same varieties in different domains. So, when I am saying different domains, I mean home domain, maybe in school domain, a market and for entertainment, etc. So, do they use same varieties in different domains? Now, I am asking you to comment on the structural differences in their language use and also comment on the fact whether they are tending to shift their language or maintain it. So, please pay attention to the fact that when we are talking about some methodology, because some of you are involved in collection of real data on field and analysis, doing analysis based on the collected data. So, please pay attention to this fact that we do not ask someone directly whether they maintain their language or they shift it. So, it is only based on indirect observation we can comment on them, their language use, and then with the help of the data and listing of the social factors and an understanding of the constraints, we can understand whether they are actually maintaining it or shifting it. There is no point asking them directly whether you maintain your language or not. So, language shift for migrant and non-migrant communities, whether they are different in nature, is another question that we can have in our mind. So, a migrant community is shifting because there is a pressure from the host community or the majority community. A non-migrant community, if a community is shifting, but they have not migrated anywhere, they are sitting at their homeland only. But even in the homeland, there are other majority communities who are forcing them to shift their language. So, what is happening? Why these two are different, or whether these are different at all? So, migrant populations often shift their language, but language shift is not associated with migration always. This is something which is another important point in sociolinguistics that we need to remember, because whenever we talk about language shift, we tend to think about migration. So, we will be talking about certain linguistic varieties later which are labeled as varieties associated with migrations. So, even then I will tell you the same point. So, language shift is not always associated with migration. Language shift can also take place for a community who have not migrated. So, political, economic and social changes in a community may lead to language shift. This is important. So, when we are saying changes, what kind of changes that we need to scan. Coming to the conclusion of the lecture. So, today we have basically talked about different factors that determine the choice of language. Then we said that some factors affect the choice patterns and migration affects language choice. This is something that we have discussed as well. Language shift is the gradual replacement of one language by another. This is the definition of language shift that we have learned. And in case of language maintenance, we said that a community holds on to its language as opposed to shift. We also learnt about the idea of language loyalty, which is related to a group maintenance. So, these are the key reference. Thank you.